Chronicles of Earth's Future Saga. Chronicles of Earth's Future Saga. Chapter 1. Prelude. Twilight of the Old World to 2025. The first quarter of the 21st century was a tumultuous twilight of the old order. After the optimism of the late 1900s, humanity entered the 2000s battered by war, crisis, and division. A war on terror and regional conflicts dragged on, eroding faith in global institutions. Liberal democracies faltered as extremist ideologies and demagogues gained ground from east to west. By 2024, for the first time in generations, autocratic regimes outnumbered democracies worldwide. Nearly 72% of people lived under some form of authoritarian rule, as freedoms receded amid fear and disinformation. The international order that prevailed since World War II began to fracture, paving the way for something new. Climate on the brink. Meanwhile, the climate crisis accelerated. Year after year broke temperature records. Droughts withered farmlands. Ice caps shrank. Superstorms lashed coasts, and wildfires turned skies orange even over great cities. From 1993 to 2022, the world suffered 9,400-plus extreme weather disasters, claiming over 765,000 lives and $4.2 trillion in damages. The frequency of billion-dollar disasters surged, forcing millions to flee their homes. By mid-2020s, record heat waves, floods, and burning forests were not anomalies, but the new normal. An uneasy awareness spread that Earth's very balance was tilting. Mass migrations of climate refugees swelled each year. By end of 2023, over 117 million people were forcibly displaced by conflict and disaster, nearly double the share a decade earlier. Crowded camps and walls at borders became defining images of this era. Corporate ascendancy. As governments struggled to cope, megacorporations filled the void. Tech conglomerates, energy cartels, and megabanks amassed wealth rivaling nations. By the late 2010s, 69 of the world's 100 largest economic entities were corporations, not countries. These corporate behemoths shaped economies and information flows, often beyond public accountability. Private firms launched their own satellites, ran digital currencies, even assumed roles in education and security. In some regions, people depended more on a handful of billionaire-run enterprises than on their elected officials for basic services. The line between state and corporation blurred. Lobbying gave way to outright corporate governance in city-states and special economic zones. This concentration of power fed inequality and public resentment, fertile ground for unrest. Technological transformation. At the same time, technology galloped ahead, outpacing society's ability to adapt. Artificial intelligence and automation exploded in capability. Early large language models and autonomous systems revolutionized industries and warfare alike. By 2025, autonomous drones and AI-assisted weapons were already deployed from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, blurring the boundary between soldier and machine. Cyber warfare and mass surveillance became routine tools of statecraft. Bioengineering advanced as well. Scientists edited genes to cure diseases and, controversially, to enhance embryos, inching toward human cloning despite ethical taboos. Digital media, ubiquitous smartphones, and the algorithmic manipulation of information eroded any shared reality, driving communities into echo chambers. Humanity was more connected than ever, but also more polarized and anxious, as if sensing that the old ways were failing. A sepia haze of bushfire smoke over Sydney's iconic skyline in 2019 foreshadowed a world on edge. Coastal metropolises that once gleamed blue under clear skies now saw gray-orange firmaments and dimmed sunlight at noon. Such unsettling scenes were postcards from the future, a future rushing toward the present. In countless cities, citizens donned masks against smoke and smog, a symbolic prelude to later years when they would don them for pandemics and dust storms as well. Across the globe, trust in the old liberal international order waned, scorched by failure to address these cascading crises. Many began to whisper that a great upheaval was coming, that perhaps only something radically new, for better or worse, could salvage civilization from accumulating chaos. Chapter 2. The Great Upheaval, 2025 to 2035. The decade after 2025 proved to be the inflection point. A series of cascading catastrophes and political breakdowns finally shattered the inertia. It began with a global financial crash in the late 2020s, a meltdown triggered by unsustainable debt, cyber attacks on banking networks, and panic amidst climate-related crop failures. Markets plunged, supply chains broke. In many countries, the middle class was wiped out, savings rendered worthless. Food and fuel shortages sparked unrest, even in affluent nations. As economies faltered, fragile democracies collapsed like dominoes. Nationalist strongmen seized power on promises to restore order and prosperity. What remained of the liberal West found itself increasingly isolated, its alliances fraying. In Asia, Africa, and Latin America, a new breed of authoritarian leaders, some military, some corporate-backed technocrats, took the helm, often welcomed by populations exhausted by chaos. Traditional great powers engaged in brinkmanship, an armed crisis in South Asia, cyber sabotage in Eastern Europe, naval standoffs in the Pacific. The Second Cold War everyone feared since the 2020s seemed perilously close to igniting into open conflict. Amid this turmoil, the climate struck harder still. The early 2030s saw back-to-back calamities. A super hurricane swamping the Gulf of Mexico, a mega-drought causing famine across 2 continents, and the sudden collapse of a major Antarctic ice shelf raising sea levels overnight. Coastal cities from Miami to Manila partially flooded, forcing mass evacuations inland. Governments were overwhelmed by the scale of humanitarian disaster and infrastructure collapse. In some regions, corporations and local militias stepped in to provide relief and security where states failed, further eroding the authority of national governments. It was in this context of desperation that the notion of a global governing alliance took hold. Thought leaders, activists, and even some heads of state began floating what once was unthinkable, a fundamental reorganization of world order, pooling sovereignty to tackle existential threats collectively. The United Nations, paralyzed and toothless for years, was bypassed by ad hoc coalitions of the willing. Emergency climate geoengineering measures were coordinated between a few major powers and tech companies, seeding the atmosphere to deflect sunlight. A loose climate accord authority formed, wielding more power than the UN Climate Convention ever had, enforcing carbon quotas on economies on the brink. For the first time, nations ceded a measure of authority to a supranational body not out of idealism, but sheer survival instinct. From this ferment emerged the blueprint of what would become known as the Global Alliance. Historians later would mark its formal inception at a summit in Reykjavik in 2037. There, amid the howling winds of an unusually fierce summer storm, a core group of nations and corporate representatives signed the Reykjavik Compact, agreeing to unify key policies on climate response, digital infrastructure, and security under a new planetary framework. This Alliance Council was formed with delegates not only from nations, but also from megacorporations and city-state consortiums, reflecting the new power realities. It was a precarious experiment, effectively a world government in embryo, born from crisis rather than utopian vision. The alliance's early years were chaotic. Power struggles erupted between blocs, democracies versus autocracies, corporate versus national interests, all under the alliance's tent. Yet the sheer scale of global emergencies forced cooperation. Under alliance coordination, a massive global stimulus was launched to rebuild economies and transition away from fossil fuels. Infrastructure projects employed millions in climate-ravaged regions, staving off total collapse. By the early 2040s, the worst of the economic freefall had been arrested. There was a glimmer of stability, but also an implicit understanding that martial discipline would guide this new order. Many liberal norms were set aside temporarily in the interest of survival. Emergency powers became permanent at the alliance level. Surveillance networks blanketed communication lines in the name of countering cyber threats and misinformation. Quietly, a council chairperson, a once obscure career diplomat turned crisis manager, consolidated influence over the alliance bureaucracy. This gray figure brokered deals between CEOs and generals, presidents and party chairmen, gradually becoming the indispensable pivot of the new system. People were weary. They accepted the tightening controls in exchange for the first feeling of safety they'd had in years. It was said that in those days the world was on a knife's edge. On one side, a descent into barbarism. On the other, the hope that an unprecedented global unity could avert that fate. The alliance was that hope, but also, as some warned in whispers, a potential seed of tyranny unlike any seen before. Chapter 3. Dawn of the Global Alliance, 2035 to 2045. In the alliance's dawn, humanity witnessed both grand achievements and festering cracks. At first, optimism cautiously bloomed. With collective action, some crises saw progress. Greenhouse emissions plummeted by the late 2030s as the alliance enforced stringent climate regulations, rationing carbon, subsidizing renewables, even commencing colossal engineering projects to cool the poles. The Great Coastal Wall Initiative broke ground, hundreds of miles of seawalls to protect megacities, funded by a new global carbon tax. Simultaneously, technological marvels advanced under alliance patronage. Breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and biotechnology were shared across borders, accelerating medical research and automation to rebuild cities smarter and stronger. By 2040, major world cities had networks of autonomous electric vehicles and AI-managed power grids, a tangible improvement in daily life. For many, these strides validated the alliance's authority. Propagandists hailed this period as the Great Renewal. In public broadcasts and the new state-aligned global media, the alliance was depicted as the savior of civilization. Children grew up pledging allegiance not just to a flag of a nation, but to Earth's unity symbol. A generation that had come of age amid chaos now felt, for a brief moment, that they stood at the threshold of a new golden age. Beneath the surface, however, old tensions reasserted themselves in new forms. The alliance's inclusive structure, bringing nations and corporations together, sowed distrust. Smaller countries resented what they saw as a corporate oligarchy hijacking global governance. Corporate directors sat alongside presidents in the Alliance Council, making decisions about resource distribution and technological standards. It did not escape notice that many policies favored the conglomerates. Intellectual property rules, for instance, protected big tech's dominance even as the alliance mandated open data in other areas. Fledgling regulations on AI and cloning were watered down after heavy lobbying by bioengineering firms. To critics, the alliance was becoming a veneer for corporate-state mergers on a planetary scale, with democracy sacrificed for efficiency and profit. Within some member states, popular dissent simmered. In the Indian Ocean region, a charismatic leader decried the alliance as global tyranny and withdrew his nation, slamming shut its ports in defiance of climate quotas that were strangling its coal-based economy. In parts of Africa and South America, social movements arose claiming the alliance was a neo-colonial project, enforcing Western corporate interests under the pretext of saving the planet. Even within core alliance countries, citizens bristled under continued austerity measures and the loss of local autonomy. The alliance's parliament, established as a nod to representation, was mostly symbolic, routinely overruled by the powerful unelected council and its chair. Democracy, people felt, had been traded for technocracy. Crucially, the alliance's security forces, an integrated multinational military and police network, found themselves overextended. In conflict-scarred regions, rogue states and warlords exploited the new order's distractions. The Middle East remained volatile. An alliance of militia warlords in former state territories outright rejected alliance mandates. These rogue regimes became rallying points for all opposed to the new global system. Black markets thrived, trafficking weapons and technology outside alliance oversight. A sense spread that a confrontation was inevitable between the one-world vision of the alliance and those who refused to submit. It was during this uneasy peace that whispers began about a shadow war within the alliance leadership. The genial alliance chair, publicly a mediator, privately amassed an intelligence apparatus loyal to himself. This chairperson, a man known for his calm smile and steely pragmatism, became increasingly secretive. Some aides vanished without explanation after questioning directives. Rumors swirled of a secret order operating within the alliance, a network of operatives blending spiritual discipline with intelligence tradecraft, answerable only to the chair. These were dismissed as conspiracy theories by official spokespeople. Yet, in smoke-filled back rooms, a few officials murmured that the chair's background was oddly opaque, and his ability to anticipate crises almost preternatural. Unbeknownst to most, a drama in the shadows would shape what came next. A drama of betrayal and belief that would soon erupt into open conflict. Chapter 4. The Secession War, 2045 to 2053. By the mid-2040s, mounting grievances reached a breaking point. A coalition of discontented nations, regions, and corporate fiefdoms secretly convened to plan a breakaway. They called themselves the Confederacy of Independent Nations, CIN, a nod to sovereignty and a rejection of centralized rule. Unlike the Global Alliance, which claimed to represent all humanity, the Confederacy's creed was self-determination, each member free from outside interference. Its ranks included several resource-rich countries chafing under alliance environmental regulations, tech havens unhappy with data-sharing mandates, and ultranationalist governments ousted in the alliance's formation now plotting a return. Quietly backed by a few megacorporations that felt sidelined in the alliance's inner circles, the CIN prepared to secede from the World Union. Open war ignited with a flashpoint in Southeast Asia. The thriving port city of Malacca, critical for global trade, declared it would no longer recognize alliance authority, raising the Confederacy flag. When alliance peacekeepers attempted to secure the port, they were met with local militias and robotic turrets in a deadly standoff. The skirmish escalated as both sides rushed in reinforcements. Within days, coordinated uprisings occurred on multiple continents. Confederate forces seized control of strategic canals, orbital launch sites, and silicon mines. The Secession War had begun. What made this conflict unlike any before were the technologies and entities involved. The alliance, lacking a standing conventional army of its own initially, activated its security forces and commandeered assets from member nations. It also unveiled a controversial secret project, a cloned battalion of engineered soldiers developed in covert labs to supplement its ranks. These clone soldiers, products of accelerated growth and intensive neuroconditioning, were deployed to hot zones with chilling efficiency. Their existence justified as a necessity, given plummeting birth rates and the need for loyal troops. Indeed, human population growth had slowed markedly. Projections showed a peak around mid-century followed by decline, and many societies faced demographic decline. The ethical lines of warfare had blurred. Where would the soldiers of a shrinking humanity come from, if not laboratories? Opposing them, the Confederacy fielded autonomous weaponry at an unprecedented scale. Swarms of AI-guided drones filled the skies. Not just surveillance drones, but lethal hunter-killers operating with minimal human oversight. Confederate commanders, often rogue AI systems themselves, launched simultaneous strikes by coordinating thousands of robotic units. The world watched in awe and terror as battles raged. Machine versus man-made man, algorithm versus clone. Human soldiers on both sides fought alongside these creations, but increasingly, the front lines belonged to the drones and engineered beings. A Predator-class unmanned combat drone prowls the skies during the Secession War, illustrating how warfare had evolved beyond human limits. In desert theaters and dense urban battle zones alike, such drones dealt swift strikes with precision-guided munitions. They hunted in coordinated packs, guided by a central AI that processed battle data faster than any human general. On the ground, cloned infantry moved with uncanny synchronization, fearless and immune to psychological warfare. Civilians caught glimpses of these pale, disciplined soldiers and scarcely knew whether to view them as saviors or monstrosities. The war took on an almost science fiction character. Nights lit up by silent swarms of drone fighters, cyber battles invisibly raging as each side hacked the other's smart weapons. Gene-tailored bioweapons deployed in targeted assaults to incapacitate clone regiments or fry circuit boards. Despite its technological prowess, the Confederacy lacked the sheer resources of the Alliance. The Alliance controlled global supply chains and orbital assets. In a decisive move in 2050, the Alliance leveraged its new orbital laser defense platform, ostensibly built to divert asteroids, to strike a Confederate command center from space, wiping out the leadership of the secessionists in one stroke. This divine fire from the sky broke the back of organized resistance. One by one, rebel enclaves fell. By 2053, the war drew to a close with the Confederacy of Independent Nations defeated and its member regions occupied or blockaded. Yet victory came at tremendous cost. Cities across the world lay in ruins from the fighting. Lagos, Bangkok, and São Paulo among them. The environment took another blow as scorched earth tactics left toxic zones. Millions were dead or displaced anew. And though the Alliance had prevailed, its moral authority was deeply tarnished. To defeat the separatists, the Alliance chair had embraced methods as ruthless as any tyrants. Mass surveillance kill switches had shut down entire city grids under Confederate control. A global propaganda campaign flooded media with false flag narratives to undermine sympathy for the rebels. And of course, the creation of a clone army violated fundamental principles that many in the Alliance's populace held dear. In the war's aftermath, the common folk were exhausted and fearful. They longed for stability above all. The Alliance leadership promised that with the separatist threat eliminated, peace was finally at hand. What few realized was that peace would come at the barrel of a gun. and the era of the Alliance's noble ideals was over. In the ashes of war, a darker order was poised to rise, shepherded by the very man who had orchestrated both the victory and the chaos that preceded it. Chapter 5. Rise of the Earth Empire, 2053 to 2058. The Alliance's triumph over separatism set the stage for an internal coup cloaked as reform. In 2054, with populations still reeling from war, the Alliance chair, by now a figure of towering influence, addressed the Emergency Global Assembly. He lamented the heavy price paid to preserve unity and insisted that only far-reaching changes could prevent another such conflict. In a speech broadcast worldwide, he proposed that the loosely governed alliance be reconstituted as a fully unified Earth government. The rhetoric was lofty. One planet, one people, indivisible, our survival demands a singular will. But behind the scenes, delegates knew this meant concentrating unprecedented power in the chair's office. War weariness and orchestrated fear left little opposition. Amid thunderous applause, some genuinely hopeful, others coerced, the Global Alliance dissolved itself and was reborn as the Earth Empire, though it was careful not to use the word empire officially at first, speaking instead of the Unified Earth Authority. The chair assumed the title of Supreme Chancellor for the transitional period. Constitutions were suspended. The Alliance Parliament was disbanded temporarily, as emergency powers were granted to the Chancellor to expedite planetary recovery. In truth, democracy died to the sound of cheering, as frightened citizens and cynical elites alike ceded liberty for promised security. Almost immediately, the newly anointed Chancellor moved to eliminate potential rivals. He revealed evidence, some fabricated by his agents, that elements of the Alliance government had secretly aided the Confederacy. A purge was launched. Loyalist clone troops, who answered directly to the Chancellor, stormed a meeting of the Alliance Council and arrested several senior representatives on live charges of treason. In one swift night later dubbed the Night of Cleansing, dozens of officials, corporate oligarchs, and military officers were executed or disappeared. Notably, those targeted included many who might have challenged the Chancellor's consolidation of power. The public fed a narrative that these figures betrayed humanity during the war, barely protested. In fact, many citizens demanded harsh punishment for anyone associated with the hated Confederacy. The Chancellor obliged, and his position became unassailable. Among the victims of the purge was the Order of the Centauri, a little-known group of philosopher agents within the Alliance, often compared to warrior monks. This secretive order, descendants of the Spiritual Intelligence Network rumors, had advised Alliance leaders quietly, advocating balance and restraint. The Chancellor, once their patron, now branded them conspirators. In a coordinated strike, Imperial security teams and turncoat clone units hunted down the Centauri adepts across the globe. Temples, safe houses, and training academies went up in flames. Those members of the order not killed were forced into hiding. People whispered of one prominent Centauri master who confronted the Chancellor directly in the Imperial Palace, only to be struck down by his former protégé, a duel unseen but felt as a disturbance by those attuned to such mysteries. With the purge of the order, a light went out in the world. Gone were the last counselors who might have tempered the Empire's wrath. The transformation was complete. The Supreme Chancellor cast aside the pretense of transitional authority and declared himself Emperor of the Earth Union, soon colloquially called the Earth Empire. In the proclamation, he justified the title as a matter of unity. "We are done bowing to the old fragmented ways. Let all the earth now bow to one leadership, as one family under the sun. The emperor's portrait, stern and fatherly, was installed in public squares from Beijing to Buenos Aires. The flag of the empire, a stylized earth encircled by an unbroken ring, replaced all national flags. The message was clear. The era of nation-states and corporate barons was over, subsumed into a singular imperial state. The empire swiftly restructured society. Regional governors were appointed, often military men loyal to the emperor, to enforce directives in each former country, now province. Local parliaments became advisory councils at best, or were dissolved. A unified imperial armed forces absorbed national militaries and corporate security armies alike. Soldiers and clone units donned a new uniform bearing the imperial crest. The emperor also unveiled a corps of black-clad secret police, the Eagle Legion, tasked with rooting out dissent and ensuring absolute obedience. Dissent did continue in pockets, but after the horrors of war, most populations offered little resistance as long as basic needs were met. Crucially, the empire mastered the art of surveillance and propaganda to pacify billions. Every street and every device was now potentially watched by AI monitors for signs of treachery. People adjusted their speech and even thoughts, remembering how neighbors who spoke ill of the emperor might vanish overnight. At the same time, media flooded with triumphalist narratives. The empire was portrayed as the savior that ended war and chaos. School curricula were rewritten to glorify the emperor's rise, depicting the late Global Alliance era as decadent and the Confederacy as pure evil. It was an empire of necessity, children were taught, a bulwark against anarchy and apocalypse. Thus, in a span of mere years, Earth's first global democracy, flawed and fragile though it was, morphed into an autocratic empire. Liberty was extinguished not with a grand battle, but through subtle machinations and public acquiescence. Many who had fought for the alliance's ideals now found themselves serving an emperor. And beyond the fanfare of parades and unity rallies, a quiet darkness settled. The sense that an ancient cycle of tyranny had returned, now on a planetary scale. Those few who perceived it could only hope that somewhere in the shadows, embers of resistance still lived, waiting for a new spark. Chapter 6. The Imperial Age, Pax Imperia, 2058 to 2080. The decades following the rise of the Earth Empire were marked by an uneasy peace and the iron grip of centralized control. This era, which propagandists dubbed Pax Imperia, saw no large-scale wars. The empire was too all-encompassing for conventional conflict. Yet violence persisted in state repression and remote struggles at the fringes. With the empire's birth, humanity seemed to simultaneously reach its nadir of freedom and zenith of collective might. On the surface, the world of the 2060s and 2070s bore witness to impressive feats. Under the emperor's directive, resources were marshaled like never before. Grand engineering projects reshaped the planet. For instance, the Sahara Sea was dredged and flooded, creating an inland sea in North Africa to moderate climate and generate hydropower. Mega solar farms and orbital reflectors stabilized global temperatures, averting the worst projections of the earlier climate crisis. Some credited the empire's authoritarian efficiency for finally implementing solutions that squabbling democracies could not. Indeed, by 2070, the atmospheric carbon level plateaued and even began to decline as enforced carbon capture and strict industrial controls took effect. The immediate climate catastrophes waned. Coastal cities were fortified and saved, at least for now, from drowning. The emperor touted these as proof of his benevolent rule. Technological advancement, too, accelerated under the empire's vast coordination. Space colonization efforts moved into full swing. No longer constrained by national budgets or debates, the empire funneled trillions into off-world expansion. Permanent bases on the Moon and Mars, begun in the Alliance days, grew rapidly. By the mid-2060s, Mars City, a domed colony in the Martian crater Argyre, boasted thousands of inhabitants and even a few nascent children born off Earth. In 2068, an imperial expedition planted the regime's flag on Mars' tallest volcano, Olympus Mons, symbolically claiming the Red Planet. Space fleets of unmanned mining ships commenced harvesting asteroids, bringing a wealth of minerals to feed Earth's industries. The Emperor promised that a new frontier of abundance would end any scarcity on Earth. By 2053, there were already over 4,000 humans living on Mars across several bases. By the 2070s, that number swelled to tens of thousands, with the dream of self-sufficient colonies on the horizon. Under the Empire's aegis, Mars outposts evolved from small research stations to bustling colonies with habitats and rovers dotting the red deserts. These images, transmitted back to Earth, were used in imperial propaganda to stir pride. Humanity united under one banner extending its reach across the solar system. The subtext was clear. Only the Empire's stable order made such wonders possible. Many on Earth took this narrative to heart. After so much earlier strife, people were tired. They embraced a sense of purpose in being part of a grand imperial project, even if it cost them personal freedoms. To walk under the stars of a Martian dusk or labor in a lunar mine became acts of patriotic duty. Yet beneath the facade of triumph, the Empire's dark side ran deep. The Eagle Legion's secret police expanded into a ubiquitous presence. Neighbors spied on neighbors for seditious talk. Entire cultures were homogenized. The Empire suppressed minority languages and traditions in favor of a single imperial culture, claiming it was necessary for unity. In libraries and data vaults, history was continually rewritten. The Alliance period painted as weak and corrupt, the Empire as predestined and righteous. Any evidence to the contrary was erased or buried in classified archives. In the privacy of homes, one of the few places privacy still existed, some parents would whisper old folk tales or banned memories to their children, of a time when one could speak freely or vote for leaders. But these remembrances grew dim as the older generation passed, and the young knew only Pax Imperia. Many youth genuinely believed the Empire had always existed, and always would. Cracks, however, formed at the margins. One source of tension was the Empire's handling of posthuman technology. Advances in cybernetics and genetic enhancement offered the potential for a new class of humans, smarter, stronger, longer-lived. The Emperor, fearing challenges to his authority, kept tight control over such technologies. Only his inner circle and select military units received the most advanced augmentations. This created a growing divide. The elite, who were literally augmented above the masses, versus the common people denied those improvements. Resentment brewed quietly among scientists and transhumanist cults who chafed at imperial bans on cognitive enhancement for the general public. Secret augmentation clinics operated in black markets, and whispered rumors told of hidden posthuman cells preparing for some future confrontation with the regime that constrained human evolution. Moreover, remnants of the old Centauri order survived in exile. A few surviving sages and their disciples scattered to remote mountains, underwater habitats, or blended into off-world colonies. They preserved the teachings of balance and inner strength that the Emperor had tried to extinguish. In the Empire's cruelty and the Emperor's absolute claim to power, these sages saw the shadow of ancient tyrannies, and possibly a prophecy of eventual downfall. They waited, training in secret, for a moment when they might guide or ignite resistance. For now, though, they stayed hidden, knowing any open action would mean death. Thus, the imperial age rolled on, superficially golden, fundamentally brittle. The Earth Empire seemed invincible, a juggernaut controlling Earth and expanding into space. Its citizens, if not joyous, were at least relieved that the nightmares of the early century were over. But, as an old maxim says, the night is darkest before the dawn. In the quiet corners and the hearts of the oppressed, the first embers of rebellion were beginning to glow. Chapter 7. Resistance in the Shadows, 2080 to 2090. By the 2080s, the Empire's monolithic facade had begun to show hairline fractures. After a generation of totalitarian stability, discontent that had long smoldered in secret started to organize. The spark came not from Earth's crowded cities under watchful eyes, but from the fringes of human settlement, where imperial reach was slightly weaker. Specifically, the distant mining colonies of the asteroid belt and the self-reliant communities on Mars became hotbeds of murmured dissent. Far from the propaganda blare of Earth, colonists faced harsh conditions with less direct support than promised. They began to question why their labor and resource extraction served a distant emperor while they struggled with thin air and radiation. Communication lines, though monitored, carried snippets of seditious sentiment between Mars domes and asteroid stations. "We are pioneers. Why bow to an emperor we've never seen?" Around this time, a series of seemingly unrelated incidents occurred, which imperial authorities dismissed as accidents or banditry, but which, in hindsight, were the first operations of an organized resistance. On Luna, the moon, a supply depot exploded, crippling a key helium-3 shipment bound for Earth's fusion reactors. In the Pacific, a clandestine broadcast hacked into imperial networks, briefly overriding them with a message of hope. "People of Earth, awaken. The night cannot last forever." In the slums of a former megacity, now demoted to Sector 12, graffiti of a rising sun symbol appeared overnight on walls, despite 24/7 surveillance. The common element was subtle but clear. Something was coordinating these acts across vast distances. The Emperor's inner circle grew nervous. They increased crackdowns, but brutally punishing whole sectors for minor uprisings sometimes backfired, breeding more resentment. The black market augmentation rings, for instance, responded to crackdowns by aligning with dissidents, offering enhanced abilities to those willing to fight. Thus emerged the so-called post-human guerrillas, small cells of rebels equipped with illicit neural uplinks, strength boosters, or biocamouflage, making them a match for the Emperor's conventional troops in skirmishes. These fighters were few, but their legend grew among the oppressed as almost supernatural avengers striking from the shadows. Perhaps most crucially, a figurehead emerged. In 2087, rumors spread of a mysterious young woman who had escaped an imperial genetic experiment facility and possessed abilities that defied explanation. A keen intuition bordering on foresight, and an uncanny knack for evading capture. She went by the alias Aurora. Whether her gifts were a result of rogue experimentation or disciplined training by one of the surviving Centauri masters remained unclear, but to many she became the face of the resistance. Aurora's voice, transmitted in pirate broadcasts, was calm and resolute. "We remember a sky with two moons," she would say, in coded metaphor, implying the duality of hope and fear. "One is setting. One will rise." Ordinary people hearing these words felt chills. For the first time, they could imagine the Emperor's reign might indeed end. Aurora claimed no titles, but disparate rebel factions began to coordinate under her subtle guidance. An insurgent-operated drone, a repurposed Imperial quadcopter, hovers low over a camouflaged rebel outpost, exemplifying the guerrilla tactics of the budding resistance. In scenes repeated across continents, such small drones delivered messages and supplies to rebel hideouts deep in forests, beneath the ruins of old cities, or in labyrinthine sewer systems. The Empire's mighty fleets and legions suddenly found themselves confounded by an enemy that was both everywhere and nowhere. Civilians by day, insurgents by night, aided by technology, the Empire thought it alone controlled. The Emperor, enraged by these affronts, ordered sweeping reprisal operations. In 2088, he commanded the Night of 1,000 raids, simultaneous midnight strikes on suspected rebel. Sympathizers in 100 cities and 10 colonies. Thousands of arrests were made. Public executions were staged as a deterrent. But this heavy-handedness only validated the rebels' cause in the eyes of the masses. The cruelty shook many out of complacency. Where fear once kept people obedient, hatred now kindled their courage. Families of the unjustly slain secretly swore oaths of vengeance. Even some in the imperial military, seeing orders to fire on unarmed crowds, began to harbor doubts about the regime they served. By 2090, an organized rebel alliance, the term they proudly reclaimed, had coalesced from the shadows. Cell by cell, old political dissidents, idealistic youth, disaffected soldiers, and the surviving Centauri sages united their efforts. They adopted Aurora's rising sun symbol as their emblem, a new dawn for humanity. Importantly, they also gained covert backing from a surprising quarter. A few former corporate magnates and officials who had lost power in the Emperor's consolidation. These covert patrons funneled resources, intelligence, and advanced prototypes to the rebels. Ironically, technologies originally developed to tighten imperial control, like quantum encrypted communication and AI surveillance countermeasures, were turned against the Empire by those who knew its inner workings. Thus, as the new decade dawned, the stage was set for open confrontation. The Empire remained enormously powerful, but for the first time since its inception, it faced a widespread, organized challenge. Still, most ordinary citizens had not yet taken sides. They remained cautious, watching how this brewing conflict would unfold. They had been conditioned to think the Empire eternal. Could a ragtag rebellion truly threaten it? Few yet imagined that within a decade, that question would be answered in a blaze of fire and hope. Chapter 8. The War of Liberation, 2091 to 2099. In 2091, the simmering insurgency erupted into full-scale war. A war not of nation against nation, but of a dispersed people against a planet-spanning tyranny. It began with a bold rebel strike that stunned the Empire. The resistance had learned of the Empire's most feared weapon under development, an orbital battle station, codenamed Aegis, capable of targeting any city or colony with a directed energy beam from space. Before the Empire could fully activate this terror, a team of rebel saboteurs, including augmented guerrillas and defected Imperial engineers, infiltrated its construction dock orbiting high above Earth. In a lightning assault, they managed to disable Aegis's main weapon and broadcast its existence to the world before Imperial forces repelled them. Though most of the strike team sacrificed their lives, their feat achieved two aims. It sparked hope among the oppressed and sowed doubt among the oppressors. The myth of Imperial invincibility cracked. Galvanized, pockets of rebellion turned into open revolts. Entire provinces rose up, ousting local governors and expelling or swaying Imperial garrisons to their side. In South America, an armored division defected en masse after its general, a principled man long troubled by imperial brutality, declared loyalty to the rebel alliance. On Mars, colonists overpowered their overseers and seized control of key installations, declaring Mars a free world independent of the Emperor. Space itself became a theater of conflict. Rebel hackers commandeered swarms of mining drones, repurposing them as makeshift space fighters to harass Imperial supply lines to the colonies. For the Empire, this was an existential threat. The Emperor, now aging but no less ruthless, unleashed the full might of his arsenal. Clone stormtroopers, conditioned since birth, were deployed to rebel hotbeds to do what conscience-laden human troops might balk at. Advanced hunter-killer AI systems were activated. Autonomous robots and informant algorithms scoured networks to pinpoint resistance leaders. In orbit, partially built Aegis platforms were hastily armed to serve as intimidation, if not fully operational. The Imperial Navy, a fleet of powerful spacecraft and atmospheric cruisers, mobilized to blockade insurgent regions and colonies, attempting to starve them into submission. The war seesawed through the early 2090 ES. The rebels were severely outgunned in direct engagements, but they were mobile, resourceful, and fueled by a fervor the Empire's conscripts largely lacked. A decisive turning point came in 2095 during the Battle of Nairobi Arcology. There, rebels and mutinous local forces had taken refuge in a massive arcology, a self-contained mega-city, and fortified it. The Empire laid siege with overwhelming force, including aerial bombardment. It seemed victory was certain for the Emperor. But at the height of battle, an elite rebel strike force led by Aurora herself managed the impossible. They infiltrated the Imperial Command Center in orbit that coordinated the assault, disabling the central AI and broadcasting a rousing call to all Imperial soldiers below. Aurora's message urged them to see the humanity in the civilians they were ordered to kill and to lay down arms. In that moment of chaos and clarity, countless Imperial soldiers hesitated. Some units even switched sides mid-battle. The arcology was saved as Imperial lines fractured from within. The Battle of Nairobi became a legend, proof that even the Emperor's servants could be awakened from their spell. By 2096, the war had spread to every continent and off-world outpost. The rebels, once disparate, now operated as a coordinated federation of liberated zones. They convened a council of free peoples in secret to plan strategy and the principles of a just society to come. Notably, this council explicitly rejected recreating the old alliance's flaws. They sought a new balance of unity and local autonomy, learning from history. Through this period, the surviving Centauri sages, now openly guiding rebel tactics, emphasized temperance. They cautioned against becoming what they fought. This kept the resistance from descending into the indiscriminate terror that often marks civil wars. Prisoners were treated humanely. Propaganda avoided dehumanizing the enemy. And the vision of a better future remained front and center. The Emperor grew increasingly desperate. His trusted right hand, a cyborg general infamous for zealotry, urged him to consider a scorched earth approach, unleash experimental weapons, even risk ecological collapse rather than lose the throne. And indeed, in 2097, the Emperor authorized the unthinkable, Project Leviathan. This was a contingency plan to release nanotechnological plagues in rebel-controlled regions, swarms of microscopic machines that would consume infrastructure and biosystems alike, reducing entire cities to lifeless gray dust. As Imperial scientists prepared to deploy Leviathan, word of it leaked through a repentant technician. The rebels sprang into action. A daring raid on the Imperial nanotech labs managed to sabotage the project just in time. though at great cost. The thought of that narrowly averted cataclysm horrified even neutral onlookers, pushing many fence-sitters firmly into the rebel camp. The empire's support drained as people realized the emperor was willing to destroy everything rather than surrender. Finally, in 2099, the war climaxed in the liberation of Earth, a series of coordinated uprisings and battles that swept the globe and beyond. On Earth, rebel forces marched on the imperial capital, formerly New York City, now called Imperial Center. Street by street, they fought elite clone guards. The populace, emboldened, erected barricades and supported the rebels despite heavy casualties. In orbit, a decisive space battle raged as rebel spacecraft and defected Imperial cruisers engaged the remaining Loyalist fleet to prevent orbital bombardment of the capital. In a dramatic duel aboard the Emperor's own command ship, Aurora confronted the cyborg general and defeated him, appealing to the sliver of humanity left in the machine man before delivering a final blow. Meanwhile, a team of rebels infiltrated the Imperial Palace's shield generator, bringing down its defenses. Cornered in his gleaming throne room overlooking a burning skyline, the Emperor at last faced the inevitability of defeat. There are many tales of how exactly the tyrant fell. Some say he perished in a final stand, unleashing blasts of hidden energy weapons until overwhelmed. Others claim he attempted to trigger a self-destruct of the capital out of spite, only to be stopped by a remorseful officer who turned on him. A popular account holds that Aurora and a small band confronted the Emperor directly, offering him one last chance at surrender and redemption, which he scornfully refused. In the ensuing struggle, the Emperor was struck down by Aurora's hand or by a collapsing structure. Accounts vary. What is consistent is that with his death, the centralized command of the empire shattered. All around the world and across the colonies, imperial forces laid down arms as news spread. The tyrant is gone. Cheers, tears, and the ringing of bells, sounds forbidden under the empire, filled the air of liberated cities. Crowds pulled down statues of the emperor, and the great banners of the empire were torn from public buildings, replaced by the rising sun emblem or by old national flags kept hidden for decades. The long night was over. The year 2100 dawned on a free Earth for the first time in nearly half a century. The cost had been immense, cities in rubble, millions dead or displaced, but humanity had reclaimed its destiny. The saga, however, was not quite over. Victors now faced the daunting task of rebuilding a world and ensuring the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And as the scars of war slowly began to heal, new challenges and old shadows would soon emerge in the next chapter of this future history. Chapter 9. A New Dawn, the Second Renaissance, 2100 to 2120. The early 22nd century opened with a global sigh of relief and a surge of possibility. With the empire's yoke lifted, survivors of the War of Liberation set about forging a new society from the ashes. In 2101, representatives from every liberated region and off-world colony gathered for an extraordinary constitutional convention in Geneva, a city symbolically chosen for its historical neutrality and as one of the few major urban centers spared heavy damage. This Council of Free Peoples, including former rebels, ex-imperial officials who defected, technologists, philosophers, even one or two of the venerable Centauri masters stepping from the shadows, spent months deliberating the framework of a just global order. The resulting charter established the Federation of Earth and Colonies, informally called the Earth Federation. Learning from the past, they carefully balanced unity with diversity. No single person would ever hold the powers the Emperor had. A rotating council and robust planetary assembly were set up. with representation for both Earth regions and off-world settlements. Safeguards, constitutional rights, independent courts, limits on emergency powers were enshrined to prevent authoritarian relapse. At the same time, recognizing the failures of the old alliance, the Federation's design allowed for regional autonomy. Cultures and communities regained freedoms to govern local affairs, as long as they upheld fundamental rights. The rising sun symbol of the rebellion was stylized into the Federation's new emblem, radiating 8 golden rays to represent the continents and major celestial colonies together. The 2010s thus saw a blossoming often referred to as the Second Renaissance. With censorship gone, there was an explosion of art, literature, and remembrance. Long-suppressed stories of heroism and tragedy during the imperial era were openly shared, helping humanity process collective trauma. Memorials rose in every city to honor those lost in the dark times and the liberation. Struggle. Culturally, a mosaic of traditions re-emerged. Indigenous languages once banned were taught again, and fusion genres in music and cuisine flourished as people proudly reclaimed identities, yet also embraced the shared narrative of overcoming oppression. Technologically, progress took a more ethical turn. The new Federation encouraged open-source development and democratization of enhancements. No more would life-extending treatments or cybernetics be reserved for a few. Research centers worked to safely distribute these benefits to all citizens, mindful of consent and inclusion. By 2110, many previously incurable diseases were eradicated, and average lifespans edged upward, addressing the demographic anxieties of the past. Global population, which had indeed peaked mid-century and dipped during war, stabilized around 8.5 billion, and then slowly began to grow again as hope for the future returned. Some countries that had nearly vanished, whether due to low birth rates or conflict, saw rejuvenation through migration and social support policies. Mass migrations defined the era as well, but unlike earlier waves driven by desperation, these were often voluntary and supported by the Federation. Climate refugees of decades past moved from temporary camps to new eco-cities built in safer zones. The Federation embarked on an ambitious project to create resettlement garden cities in formerly uninhabitable areas, terraforming deserts and polluted lands into green, habitable spaces with advanced environmental tech. Former imperial labor camps in the Arctic, for example, were transformed into thriving research towns once permafrost was stabilized. In space, the colonies formally joined the Federation on equal footing with Earth states. Mars declared its capital at the now-free Mars City and elected delegates to the Federation Assembly. Technological exchange between Earth and colonies accelerated improvements. Asteroid mining resources rebuilt Earth's infrastructure, while Earth's biotech advancements terraformed sections of Mars to prepare for eventual large-scale habitation. Humanity's expansion beyond Earth was now framed not as imperial manifest destiny, but as a collective venture. The stars belong to everyone. A poignant example came in 2115, when a multinational, multi-colony crew embarked on the first interstellar probe project, planning to send an AI-guided ship to Alpha Centauri. It carried messages and art from ordinary citizens of Earth and Mars, encapsulating the new spirit of unity in diversity. However, this period was not without challenges. The scars of empire ran deep. Regions that had been heavily bombarded or oppressed struggled with poverty, crime, and lingering resentment. Some former imperials, especially among the military and bureaucratic classes, had difficulty adjusting to the loss of privilege, occasionally forming insular communities or even underground fraternities nursing imperial nostalgia. The Federation, valuing freedom, allowed even these voices within bounds, hoping inclusion would heal rather than exclusion fester. But quietly, Federation security kept eyes on a few extremist groups preaching about the glory days of the Empire and denying its atrocities. Of greater concern were the economic adjustments. With megacorporations disbanded or reined in by law, many were broken up for their collaboration with the Empire. The economy shifted to a mixed model, emphasizing local cooperatives, green industries, and AI-managed resource allocation for the public good. Living standards rose for most, yet some elites who lost power grumbled, and some regions struggled to transition from war footing to civilian livelihoods. The Federation initiated a massive reconstruction fund, aided by the astonishing troves of wealth recovered from the imperial treasury. The emperor had hoarded unimaginable resources. This helped stave off a post-war depression that some feared. Throughout these trials, Aurora, who survived the final war, became a unifying moral presence, though she refused any formal office. She helped establish the Federation, then retreated from the spotlight, reportedly to aid humanitarian efforts in remote areas and mentor the next generation of leaders in empathy and wisdom. Many called her the conscience of the Federation. Her humility set a precedent that leadership in this new age was about service, not personal glory. By 2020, Earth and its colonies were on a steady, if delicate, upward trajectory. The Federation was not perfect. Politics still had disputes. Humans were still human. But the central ideals of liberty, community, and accountability held strong. People referred to these years as morning after a long storm, when the air is clean and one can rebuild with lessons painfully learned. Still, lurking beyond the sunrise was an awareness that history never ends. Old evils can mutate and return in new guises. And indeed, unbeknownst to most celebrating the new dawn, in the far reaches of the void, a remnant of the darkness was waiting, gathering strength to cast a shadow on the new era's light. Chapter 10. Remnants of the Shadow, 2120 to 2135. Even as the Federation of Earth and colonies flourished, the legacy of the Empire had one final act. In the aftermath of the Emperor's fall, not all of his followers had surrendered or reintegrated into society. A cadre of die-hard loyalists, high-ranking military officers, technocrats, and indoctrinated youth from the Empire's elite academies had fled into the far reaches of the solar system rather than face justice. During the chaos of liberation, these fugitives commandeered a number of ships and disappeared beyond Mars, venturing into the asteroid belt and the darkness of the outer planets. For years, their fate was a mystery, a footnote as the world moved on. But in secret, they survived, nursed their vengeance, and plotted a return. By the 2130 IS, evidence of a growing threat became hard to ignore. Deep space mining outposts at Jupiter's moons began to report raids by unknown attackers. A Federation patrol ship vanished near Saturn under strange circumstances. When a covert reconnaissance probe finally captured an image of a sleek, ominous warship bearing a modified Imperial insignia, the truth was confirmed. The Imperial Remnant, as people dubbed it, was real and active. These exiles had spent decades building a hidden power base. They had likely established themselves on a distant dwarf planet or hollowed asteroid, forging new war machines away from the Federation's gaze. The Remnant's ideology had curdled into something even more fanatical than the old empires. They believed the Emperor was martyred, and that the Federation's freedoms were a sign of weakness and moral decay. In their exile, they had cultivated a quasi-religious cult of personality around the Emperor's memory, even as their leadership fractured among warlords and surviving generals. To rally their ranks and justify their survival, they preached a destiny: to restore the new order on Earth, no matter the cost. And unlike the emperor's straightforward authoritarianism, this new generation employed a mix of terror, propaganda, and advanced technology gleaned from scavenged imperial research labs that had been thought destroyed. In 2133, the remnant made its bold strike, announcing its presence to the solar system with fire and fury. In a coordinated assault, remnant fleets emerged from the darkness to attack multiple targets. A Federation shipyard orbiting Earth was bombarded. A lunar colony's communication center was sabotaged by infiltrators, and most shockingly, a new Martian settlement, one of the symbols of Federation's hopeful expansion, was struck by a kinetic bombardment from space that leveled half of it. The death toll was staggering. The remnant's message boomed across hacked Federation channels. The false freedom of the Federation would end, and a pure empire would rise from the ashes. The Federation, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond. For over 3 decades, they had known relative peace. Many of their armed forces had been decommissioned or redirected to exploration and rescue missions. Now they had to rapidly remilitarize to face an enemy as technologically advanced as any Empire fleet, and far more ideologically driven. In emergency sessions, the Federation Assembly empowered a joint task force to defend humanity. This caused deep anxiety. Was the Federation resorting to old militarism? Would war undo the fragile new society? Leaders promised transparency and restraint, insisting this was a defense of the very freedom they had built. Initial encounters did not go well for the Federation. The remnant's ships, hardened by decades in harsh space, executed guerrilla strikes and then vanished into the outer darkness. They deployed cyber attacks of unprecedented sophistication, briefly knocking out Earth's power grids and causing chaos. Perhaps their most fearsome weapon was a revival of an imperial horror: a cloned fanatic army, grown in secret vats, but with a twist. These clones were augmented with cybernetic implants from birth, making them relentless, pain-insensitive shock troops. The remnant landed some of these forces on the far side of the moon and in covert drops on Earth to sow discord, freeing former imperial political prisoners to rally pockets of discontent. Sporadic street battles and acts of sabotage flared up in Federation cities, testing the unity of the free world. It was as if the ghost of the Empire had returned in a more ghastly form, determined to prove that the cycle of tyranny was not broken after all. But the Federation had something the old alliance never did: a populace that had tasted freedom and was resolved not to lose it again. Grassroots resistance on Earth sprang into action to root out remnant infiltrators. Community watch groups, former rebels now older but no less passionate, mobilized to secure neighborhoods and infrastructure without heavy-handed state control. On the Moon and Mars, colonists fought bravely alongside the new Federation Defense Forces to repel attempted landings. Memories of the liberation were still fresh enough to galvanize millions in common cause. Crucially, some of the remnant's rank and file, many of whom were actually the children or grandchildren of exiles raised on propaganda, began to falter when faced with the reality of the Federation's society: cooperative, pluralistic, thriving. A few pilots and soldiers even defected, bringing valuable intel about remnant staging areas. Learning from these, in 2135, the Federation launched Operation Dawnstar, a decisive campaign to end the remnant threat. Federation ships, including newly constructed peacekeeper cruisers and retrofitted mining vessels, turned warships, a mirror of how rebels once repurposed tools into weapons, pushed out to the fringes. In a running battle through the asteroid belt, they engaged the remnant fleet. Thanks to superior numbers, clever AI-assisted tactics, and the remnant defections providing key weak points, the Federation managed to rout the enemy. The final showdown took place around a dwarf planet in the Kuiper Belt, Eris, which the remnant had adopted as their fortress. In a fierce engagement, the Federation task force destroyed the remnant's command ship and disabled their ground bases on Eris. Remnant leadership, the would-be warlords, were captured or perished, including the last genetically identical heir of the Emperor, a clone they had created, attempting to literally resurrect their fallen leader. He was found slain on the bridge of his flagship, having chosen death over capture. Thus, the so-called Remnant War ended relatively swiftly by late 2135, thanks to collective effort and the Federation's refusal to succumb to fear. Importantly, throughout the crisis, the Federation upheld its values. There were no witch hunts or mass internments of Imperial sympathizers this time, and decisions were made through debate rather than dictated by a single authority. This strengthened the citizenry's confidence that freedom and security could coexist. The remnants of the remnant, if any survived the final battle, faded into obscurity, finally closing the chapter on the Empire's long shadow. The attempted return of tyranny had been thwarted by a generation determined not to relive history's horrors. Humanity once more stood united and vigilant, scars slightly reopened, but ultimately more resilient. Epilogue: a saga's end, a legend's beginning. The Star Wars saga reimagined as Earth's future history is a tale of cycles, of light fading into darkness and light emerging anew. Not in a galaxy far away, but here, on our home planet. It is a chronicle of how humanity nearly succumbed to its worst impulses, teetered on the brink of self-destruction, yet ultimately reclaimed its better destiny through courage, solidarity, and hope. In the aftermath of the Remnant's defeat, the year 2140 dawns under a truly free sky. The Earth is not without challenges. Climate maintenance is an eternal responsibility. The balance between technology and ethics requires constant vigilance, and the diversity of peoples means disagreements will never vanish. But the people of Earth have learned, at tremendous cost, the value of guarding liberty. No longer do they take peace for granted or entrust their fate blindly to self-proclaimed saviors. Across the world, in Federation forums and local councils, ordinary citizens engage in the slow, patient work of democracy that is the true safeguard against the return of empire. From a distance, an elder might observe the arc of events from 2025 to 2140 and notice the rhyme of an ancient story. The fall of a republic into empire, the rise of heroes and sages, the struggle against tyranny, the eventual triumph of the human spirit, and the renewal of community. This narrative, passed down through generations, becomes something of a modern myth, a future saga akin to the epic legends of old. Children grow up learning both the cautionary chapters, how complacency and fear can open the door to oppression, and the inspiring ones, how even a small group of determined souls can change the course of history. In a small village in the Scandinavian twilight, a great-grandmother who once fought in the rebellion sits by a fireplace telling wide-eyed kids about the time when the sky was filled with drones and the nights were ruled by an emperor, and how people just like them, with bravery and kindness, brought back the day. On Mars, under the dome of a bustling city, new colonists celebrate Liberation Day each year, honoring not only their freedom from Earth's old conflicts, but also the unity that now allows them to thrive on a new world. High above, at the edge of interstellar space, The unmanned probe, bound for Alpha Centauri, carries with it the story of Earth's saga encoded in its memory banks, to tell any who might find it that we were a species that fell and rose and learned. As the narrative closes, we see humanity not as a perfect society, but as a wiser one. The saga that began in struggle ends in cautious optimism. The long time ago of democracy's fall is remembered so that it never need happen again. And though no mystical force guided this future, one might say the true force in this story was the enduring capacity for empathy, courage, and cooperation. Qualities that, in the end, turned out to be stronger than any army of clones or fleet of drones. The future history of Earth thus mirrors the timeless drama of myth. Darkness and light in tension, ultimately resolved by the choices of individuals. And as with any myth, the end is but a new beginning. Under the watchful stars of our galaxy, the people of Earth step forward into the future they have earned. Not an empire, but a community of hope, determined to craft their own destiny among the cosmos. The saga has become legend, and the lessons of that legend light the way as humanity journeys on,